Hello, in this video we're going to graph sine, cosine, and tangent. Let's start with sine. Sine has this beautiful up-down curve which repeats every 2 pi radians, or 360 degrees. It starts at 0, it goes up to 1 at pi over 2, back down to 0 at pi, all the way down to -1, and then 0 again at 2 pi, and then it repeats. To graph this by hand, I'm going to scroll down and look at our famous unit circle. So if I want to start with sine, y equals sine x, you do have to be very careful because when you're graphing an xy plane, this x and y are different than this x and y. X and y stand for the values of sine and cosine on your unit circle. X stands for your angle, let's call it theta so we don't mess up, and y stands for the value of theta. The value of sine, which could be the y. Okay, so I'm going to go one full revolution. I'm going to break this up into 4 pieces, 3 pi over 2, and I'm just going to make a table, x and y, or theta, right? Okay, so when x is 0, I'm actually going to call this r, just so we do not get confused, just for another letter. So 0. So 0 is the angle. So if I look at the angle at 0, right, we do know that the definition of sine of theta in this unit of circle is y. So that's why it really didn't matter if the r was a y in this case. And sine of 0 we know is 0. I'm going to do, I know the next one is pi over 2, but I'm going to do just pi over 4 just for the first one, just so you see what's going on. Pi over 4, right? We know that the sine value is the y, so that's square root of 2 over 2, which, by the way, if you figure that out on your calculator, it's about 0.7. And let's do pi over 2. Right, sine of pi over 2, just making a chart. Let's start with 3 points. Sine of pi over 2, that's, again, the angle. So that's angle, and we know it's 1. So if I plot these points, the x is 0, 0. The next one halfway in between here, call this 1, is about 0.7. And pi over 2 we know is 1. So that's where you get that first half of that little curve. So now if I skip, I'm just going to go to pi. Right? Sine of pi, there's pi right there. It's the y value is 0. And let's do the next one, next 3 pi over 2. There's 3 pi over 2, is -1 is sine, the y value. And let's scroll down just one little bit more so we can get to one more value, 2 pi. Because 2 pi we know is the same as 0 degrees, which goes back to 0. It repeats. So pi was 0. 3 pi over 2, we go down here to -1, is somewhere down there, and 2 pi is 0. You get that curve that you saw in our first video. So let's copy this chart and look at that first chart and see if they match. You can see they do match because 0 is 0, right? Pi over 4 is about in between the, right? 0 and the pi over 2, which is about 45 degrees, is about 0.7. Right? And there's where the scale is here. And pi over 2 we know is 1. Pi we know is 0. 3 pi over 2, -1. 2 pi is 0. So that is the shape of sine. So now let's look at cosine. Scroll down. Here's, by the way, where the website where I got these graphs. Plot the cosine. Cosine is just sine, right? It looks the same, the same up and down smooth curves. But the difference is it starts at 1 instead of 0. Notice how this one starts at 0, whereas cosine starts at 1. And then it heads down, goes to 0, all the way to -1 at pi, and then it goes back up again through 0 at 3 pi over 2 and up to 2 pi. We're going to graph that by hand the same way. So let's go back to that unit circle and erase what we have here. And again, you have to be very careful because this x and y, this x stands for the angle and the y stands for the value that cosine makes, where this x and y stands for the values of cosine and sine. So two totally different things. So again, I'm going to try calling this theta and this r. And this is what's really weird when you go ahead and make a chart here, right? When x is 0, which is the angle, the value for cosine we know is x, because we had in our unit circle that x was equal to cosine of theta. That was kind of weird. So I realized that there's a different, right? The y's and x for here means something different than the y's and x when we're graphing, right? Again, this is the angle, looking at the angle versus the value of cosine. Here, x is the cosine, y is the sine. X is the cosine, y is the sine. So cosine of 0 degrees, we know is 1. That's why instead of 0 starts at 1. And then we did that pi over 4. What was the pi over 4 again? That's the same value as sine for that one. That one was square root of 2 over 2, which is approximately 0.7. And pi over 2, let's do all the same values that we did in the last one. Pi over 2 is, the cosine is 0 now because it's the x. Pi is the next one. You can see instead of 0 it's -1. Continue down, and let's start graphing these points, I guess. If we graph this, what we get so far is 0 is 1, right? Let's go to 2 pi, break it into 4 pieces, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2. At pi over 4, we know it was 0.7, pi over 2, so we know we have that nice curve like we did before, but now this is -1. Pi is -1. So let's continue. What's next is 3 pi over 2. What is 3 pi over 2? The cosine is the x, which is 0. And finally 2 pi, and then it goes back to 1. So 0 and 1. So you can see the difference between sine and cosine. Again, let's copy this chart and put it to the original. Now it's next to the original. Let's move it to the right level so you can see the whole thing. 0 is indeed 1, right? Pi over 4, which is halfway between 45 degrees, 0 and 90 degrees, is about 0.7. Pi over 2 is 0. Pi is -1. 3 pi over 2, 0. So it matches that. There's that shape that we graphed below. So that is how you graph cosine. Finally, we're going to graph tangent. The tangent function has a completely different shape. It goes from negative to positive infinity. Infinity, if you remember in algebra, means a very large number, right? So it goes on and on. It goes just up. And it does have a repeating pattern, though. It crosses through 0 degrees every pi radians. Notice how it crosses at 0. And at pi over 2, right, because tangent of pi over 2, or 90 degrees, is undefined, these are called asymptotes. It never goes through there, so that's why it goes off to positive or negative infinity. So how would you plot that by hand? Well, I'm going to do it the same way. Let's look at our unit circle. There it is. So again, let's do this in a different color. Y equals tangent of x. Again, the y and x are different, so maybe I better do r and theta just while I'm making my chart. This is the angle, and this is the r. This is like my x and my y. And what happens at tangent of 0? So do you remember the definition of tangent on your unit circle is y over x? See how the y's are different here than here? So y over x. So 0, there it is y over x, 0 over 1, which is 0. Let's do pi over 4. At pi over 4, what happens is it's y over x, so it's this weird square root of 2 over 2 over square root of 2 over 2, which turns out to be 1, because they're the same value. And pi over 2, what happens is it's y over x, 1 over 0. Oh, I meant to say 0 there, which is, that is undefined. So when you're graphing this, 0 is 0. Because it's undefined, I'm just going to stop at pi over 2. Then I'm going to go halfway. So we know that pi over 4 is about 1. Call that 1. And then here it's undefined. So that's where we draw this asymptote. And what's going to happen is it's going to look something like that, because it cannot cross that. If you really want to see that, you can look at even some of these values, like 30 or 60 degrees, and you're going to see that it's going to have this sort of shape. Okay, what happens then, because that is undefined, I'm going to keep on going this way instead. So what happens at negative pi over 4? So that would actually go down this way. Negative pi over 4, oh, that turns out to be the same value, but they're negative, so it's negative 1. So that would be negative 1. And then negative pi over 2, by the same concept as the pi over 2, it's y over x, which is negative 1 over 0, which is still undefined. So there's going to be asymptote there. I ran out of room. Let me split that up. Okay, that's better. And so it's going to look like that. And then this is just going to repeat. So if you did, for instance, if you add pi to this, that would be pi right in the middle, right? It would also be 0. And if you did 45 degrees from that, it'd be negative 1. And another 45 degrees from that, it would be 1. So you're going to see the same shape over and over again. The period of this is only pi instead of 2 pi. Notice how these, one full length was 2 pi, where tangent, where's tangent? There it is, right? It only goes one full one. It only goes from negative pi over 2 to pi. And you can see that that's what our graph looked like. There it is. The same graph. Hope that helps.